45 seconds to frame your question, no exceptions.
Live event coverage from RadioSt.Pete.com. We are live on Thursday afternoon at the St. Pete Yacht Club in downtown St. Petersburg, Florida, at the Suncoast Tiger Bay Club Luncheon. Our speaker today will be Sheriff Bob Gaultieri, the Sheriff of Pinellas County, Florida. He'll speak to a group of a couple of hundred here in attendance at the Yacht Club, and then take questions here in the Tiger Den. Live event coverage from RadioSt.Pete.com. Pat Gerard, the president of the Tiger Bay Club, has just started the program. Let's go live to the podium.
This young man needs no introduction, and so suffice it to say that when he walks in the room, everybody looks up at him, in one way or another. Our Sheriff, Bob Gaultieri.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. What I thought I'd do is just kind of give you a little bit of an overview of the Sheriff's Office, kind of where we are, maybe touch on a couple of issues, and hopefully leave the hot issues to you all to ask in your questions. So where do we stand at the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office today? Of course, we're one of 67 sheriffs and sheriff's offices in the state of Florida. We have very diverse responsibilities. Most of you are familiar with the law enforcement responsibility that we have. And our primary service area is the unincorporated part of Pinellas County, and there are 13 of Pinellas County's 24 cities that don't have their own police department that contract with us to be their police provider, like Safety Harbor, Oldsmar, South Pasadena, Indian Rocks, St. Pete Beach, those cities. The largest part of our operation is actually running the Pinellas County Jail. So in addition to law enforcement, the jail operation is a significant part of what we do. And then the third area is judicial operations. There are 5 courthouses in Pinellas County, about 50 sitting judges, and the sheriff is responsible for security in all those courthouses and for all those judges on a daily basis. Getting back to the jail for a second, because it is the biggest part of our operation. When you look at the big scope of the sheriff's office, we have about 3,000 employees. Our annual budget this year will top about $265 million. And a good chunk of that, about $100 million of it, goes to operating the county jail. The average inmate population in the county jail on any given day is about 2,800 inmates in our care, custody, and control, if you will, and that is people who are in the county jail, people who we supervise on misdemeanor probation, people who are on pretrial release. We have almost 7,000 people that are in some form of custody status with the Sheriff's Office here in Pinellas County. The jail population is largely made up of about 65% pretrial detainees. Those are people that have been charged with a crime, have not gone to court, and have not had their case disposed of. Those people who get sentenced to more than a year and a month in jail, they go to the state prison system, and the Florida Department of Corrections today has about 100,000 inmates in the state prison system. If they get sentenced to less than a year and a month, then they do their time in the Pinellas County Jail. We have a 432-bed medical facility there. And it's sometimes, for those people that are coming in, it's the only medical care they get. It costs you, the taxpayers of Pinellas County, about $17 million a year to run jail medical. The average cost to house somebody in the county jail is about $123 a day. So that's kind of an overview, briefly, of what we do in a broad brush. If you look across the country, there are about 18,000 police departments in the United States. There are 3,080 sheriff's offices. We're about the 15th largest sheriff's office, and we run the 28th largest jail system in the country. So it's a big agency, a lot of moving parts, a lot of great things going on. Probably one of the best things I can tell you that's going on and has happened and hopefully will continue to happen within the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office is over the last 5 years, we've been able to reduce what's called Part 1 crime, which are the serious crimes. Every year, every one of those 18,000 police departments and almost 3,100 sheriff's offices report the crime within their service areas and jurisdictions to the federal government, and they publish reports. And so this is data that's reported and it's all equalized, and we've been able to reduce that serious crime. So those are the rapes, the robberies, the murders, the burglaries, those things that you're most concerned about in our service area is down 23% over the last 5 years. So when I could tell you about that is that, and the reason why I think it's so significant is because it means that crime has not occurred. It means that our primary objective, our primary mission, and what I think is our primary responsibility is to keep crime from occurring. I can sit up here and tell you about great case closure rates and great arrest rates and all of that, but that means something has happened and then we've had to do something about it. So we like to take a very proactive approach and try and prevent things from happening so that there aren't victims. And one of the things that we focus on and try to do is to prevent recidivism, and with jail programs and life skills programs, and trying to keep those people that have had that bump in the road, that are doing their time in the county jail, to give them some different tools in the toolbox so that when they do reenter society, they reenter successfully, because successful or effective reentry is public safety, because that means they're not reoffending. Unfortunately, and we're no different than most places, we do have a pretty high recidivism rate. The recidivism rate for people coming out of the county jail today is probably about 60%. We book about 48,000 people a year into the county jail, but that's not 48,000 different people. That's a lot of the same people over and over again. So whatever we can do to prevent that recidivism, to reduce the amount of crime people are committing, is really, I think, public safety at its finest. So those are just kind of some statistics and some overview about what's happening and kind of where we are. Probably one of the most significant challenges we have today is what I have referred to, and the commissioners that are in the room heard this when I did my budget presentation a couple of weeks ago, is the brain drain. Law enforcement across the country, and here in Pinellas County is no different, is experiencing a really, really huge attrition rate, and of experienced law enforcement officers that are just at that stage in their career where they're retiring. So let me give you, and people often ask me, what will keep you up at night? Well, this will keep you up at night. We have 465 patrol deputy positions in the sheriff's office. Those are the deputies that are out there responding to calls, that when you call 911, these are the people, the men and women who are showing up. So we have 465, that's just deputies, not supervisors. 332 of those 465 have been hired in the last 3 years. And that includes academy time and field training time. 53% of all of our patrol sergeants, who are the first line supervisors, have less than 2 years as a sergeant. All 4 captains who run divisions at the jail have been captains for less than a year. All 4 majors who run bureaus have been majors less than a year. So we're a very new agency, a very young agency in many respects, and there are certain challenges that go along with that. I think in about 5 years we'll be in great shape. And it won't be me, but whoever's standing here 25 years from now needs to think about that well in advance, because they're going to be in the same boat all over again. But again, this is no different than what agencies are facing, but that is probably the number one challenge that we have, is bringing these people along, allowing them to get the experience to professionally mature within their positions. From a crime standpoint, probably the number one crime, the most common crime that we face here in Pinellas County, which again is no different, is property crime. And within that category of property crime, the most common is burglaries. And within that category is car burglaries. And if you read the paper today, you'd see that in that category, the most common way that people get into your cars is, guess what? You leave them unlocked. And so about 70% of all car burglaries, there's no forced entry. And in the last 2.5 years, so for 2013, 2014, and to date, we've had well over 100 car burglaries where guns were taken, where the cars were unlocked. So about 83% of all car burglaries where guns were taken, there was no forced entry. And we had one just about a month ago where a person had an AR-15 rifle and 2 handguns in the car, car's unlocked, and the guns are missing on the street in the hands of criminals. You all remember back in December, Officer Charlie Condek with the Tarpon Springs Police Department, who was shot and killed. The gun that was used to kill Officer Condek was taken from an unlocked car burglary. So it's so irresponsible, and car thefts themselves are up as well. And the primary reason why these car thefts are up is because people are leaving their keys in their cars and their cars unlocked. Is that car thefts are up. They're here up in the city of St. Pete, they're up throughout Pinellas County, and it's mainly young people who are taking these cars and joyriding. These aren't, they're taking them and they're putting them in chop shops and they're selling them or whatever. They take them, joyride, a pursuit happens, sometimes somebody gets hurt as a result of that, and then they dump the cars. So these are all preventable crime, and preventable if everybody would just please help us and lock your car doors. So probably the most serious crime, so that's the most common crime, property crime. The most serious crime that we see today is probably the exploitation of children through the internet, and sex crimes and human trafficking, and especially those who are preying on the internet, trying to entice these kids to meet them, to engage in sex. It's a big problem. It's a problem that is continuing to get worse. We have a dedicated special victims unit to investigate those crimes. We're making a great effort at it, but there's so much of it out there. And very, very serious child pornography. We're not talking about people who go on the internet and into various websites. We're talking about hardcore child porn with 3, 4, 5-year-old kids. It's just the most disgusting thing in the world, but it's a big problem in our community today. So that, I think, is probably one of the most serious crimes that we face and serious challenges. So to kind of get away from that for a second, and Lou will tell me, I'm sure, how much time I have left here before we take questions. 10 minutes. 10 minutes, okay. So I want to get into some of what I'll call more of the Tiger Bay-esque issues. So one of them I want to talk about, and somebody can follow up with a question if they want, but is the issue of body cameras in policing. And I'm not a fan of body cameras. In fact, I'm opposed to them, and we're not going to be implementing a body camera system in the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. So the question is why? There's no question that we have in law enforcement in this country today is that there is a confidence issue, there is a trust issue. And I believe strongly it's up to us as law enforcement to address that, to address it head on, and to gain the trust of you, to gain the trust of the citizens. It's on us to do that. The onus is not on the citizens. And law enforcement across the country has to conduct itself in a proper way, a good way, in a way that allows people to have that trust and confidence that we're doing the right thing. There are going to be mistakes, there are going to be blips. We're not perfect, just like everybody else. But when we do make those mistakes, we need to own up to them. We need to make the changes that are necessary and get it right. So when we are talking about trust, and if there's a trust problem, we need to fix it, is that using body cameras or using electronics is not an answer to that. That's not an answer to the trust problem. And in many respects, and in many aspects, I believe that this reliance on electronics, this reliance on body cameras can actually make the situation worse. And one example of that is that when an officer is wearing a body camera, and whether it's on an eyeglass or on their lapel or on the front of their shirt, is looking straight forward. It's myopic, it's single vision, it's narrow, it's tunnel vision. And that camera is not taking into account all of the things that the officer or the deputy is seeing, hearing, or has knowledge about that helps them to make a decision. So if what somebody sees is only this, but the officer used all of this to make the decision, then that can distort the reason why they made it and can actually lead to more problems. You saw in New York and other places where things were captured on video. That didn't eliminate the concern, that didn't mitigate it, that didn't really alleviate it. In fact, in some cases, it may have even made it worse. Another scenario that you're going to have, and do have, is what happens when, if, God forbid, you go home this afternoon and you find out that somebody's burglarized your house and it's ransacked. You call the police and they show up. And an officer is coming into your home with his or her body camera on, going through your house, videotaping everything. Well, guess what? Your next door neighbor isn't really too keen about you, and they do a public records request, and now they've got the video. Or you have a situation where you're interviewing a sex assault victim, and it's a rape victim. Do you really want the officer body cam recording everything that that victim says? No, we don't want that. So you've got to have policies in place. You've got to have policies in place that dictate when the body camera will be turned on and when it's turned off. You cannot have a system where the body camera is on 24/7 every time that the officer comes on shift, and it stays on until the end. So when you have that, where they're going to be turned on and turned off, what happens when the officer turned off the body camera when he went into your house this afternoon to investigate that burglary, but then comes outside and something bad happens, and the officer has to take enforcement action, and guess what? Legitimately, and with no ulterior reason or no ulterior motive, is that they forgot to turn it on when they now take that enforcement action, and something happens and they have to use deadly force, or they have to do something that's an enforcement action. You know what's going to happen? They're going to get accused of intentionally not turning it on, and that's going to cause trust issues. So there is no silver lining, there's no silver bullet with these body cameras. Can they have value? Yes, but the about $2 million expense that it would cost to equip everybody within the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office and store that data is not worth it to me. We do have dash cameras in every car. The deputies have mic packs on their gun belts, and we use technology, we use cameras, we use electronics to gain evidence of the crime, and we use it for evidence collection. I don't think it should be a monitoring tool for law enforcement. I don't think that's the answer. I don't think it's the right direction, and so that's why I'm not a fan of body cameras. And we're not going to do it. So that's where I am on the body camera issue. Another big issue that we have and we face across the board with law enforcement is the intersection or collision course between the mental and behavioral health system and law enforcement community. Even if law enforcement does it extremely well, and there's room for improvement on our part, we are not doing it as well as we can do it. We need to do it better. And when I say that, that means identifying those people that are having a mental or behavioral health crisis. Their conduct is not because of criminal conduct, because they're bad people doing a bad thing. It's because of a mental or behavioral health issue. Identifying them and diverting them away from the criminal justice system and into the mental or behavioral health system. But that system has to do a better job in and of itself of treating these people long term and not just turning them back out on the street. I mentioned to you we book about 48,000 people a year in the county jail. Back in 2013, which is the year for which data is most recently available that I'm aware of, there were about 171,000 Baker Acts in the state of Florida. I believe about 10,000 of those occurred here in Pinellas County. And when you look at the data and you compare people that are booked into the county jail and into the criminal justice system and those people that are in the Baker Act system, it's a lot of the same people. You got a lot of these people that are on a revolving door crossing back and forth between both systems. So we have advocated for the expansion of the crisis intervention teams, which are teams where law enforcement officers are trained to identify and recognize these mental and behavioral health issues, divert the people out of the jail and into a facility where they can get help. When it goes wrong, and we don't do that, we have tragic consequences. And last year, unfortunately, we had a situation where a woman was Baker Acted, and in the course of the Baker Act, she kicked the deputy. So he didn't put her in the mental and behavioral health system. He booked her into the jail. He shouldn't have done that. He was not CIT trained, and she died in the jail. And I wrote a check for $1.2 million to settle that case because it was a calamity of errors from the time the officer or the deputy came in contact with her until the time that she died in the jail. So that was a situation where we could have done it better. We had a situation several months ago down in St. Pete Beach where we had a woman who came at the deputies with a knife over her head, running at the deputies with a knife over her head, and she had serious mental health issues, and the deputies could have used lethal force. They would have been justified in killing her, but the deputies who were there were crisis intervention team trained. At their own peril, they took evasive action. They didn't use deadly force. They took her into custody under the Baker Act, didn't charge her with a crime, took her to a receiving facility, and within 72 hours, she's right back out on the street again. And you know what she had when she went out on the street? She had prescription medication. We followed up with her, and she threw the prescription medication away. We had one just a couple weeks ago where down in St. Pete Beach, again, same situation. The person went to St. Anthony's, and they're out within 24 hours. The void I see, is long-term case management and navigation within the mental and behavioral health system. I think the receiving facilities are doing all they can with what they have to work with, but there need to be some serious changes. There were changes proposed this year in the Florida legislature, but I guess we won't talk about that. So all of those bills died, and hopefully they'll come back again next year. I know Senator Garcia, Representative Harrell, and others worked very hard, Representative Peters, worked very hard on trying to get some significant changes, perhaps even merging together the Baker Act with the Marchman Act and some other laws. There's a lot of discussion about that, but we did get an increase in $800,000 for CIT funding so that we can get more deputies and law enforcement officers across Florida trained. And right now, 40 of the 67 sheriff's offices in Florida use crisis intervention team. My goal is to get it to 100%. And I was chairing this year, and I will next year, the legislative committee for the Florida Sheriff's Association, and we're going to do everything we can to try and make changes and make a difference within that mental and behavioral health system from what we can control and work with our partners who are in the system, and hopefully they can get additional funding and resources to do it a little bit differently than the way it is and navigate these people with long-term care so that they're not just bouncing back on a revolving door between the jail, the criminal justice system, and the mental and behavioral health system. So how much time I have, Lou? Minute and a half. So I'll dovetail this. Councilmember Newton's here. Others are very familiar with the homeless issue here in St. Pete. And Commissioner Long's here, who I serve on the Homeless Leadership Board with. That's another area where we got to do better. I think the ultimate question when it comes to homeless, and many of you are aware of Pinellas Safe Harbor. We opened it in January 2011. And I told you that we house about 2,800 people a day in the Pinellas County Jail. The Sheriff's Office runs Pinellas Safe Harbor. We have about 400 people a day there. So $123 a day in the county jail, and out of our budget, $13 a day at Pinellas Safe Harbor where they're getting services. So it works, and it's keeping those people out of the jail when what they are engaging in is conduct because of their homelessness. It's social crime, and the criminal justice system does not become a dumping ground for what is a social problem. But with that said, I think that the crossroads that we're at within Pinellas County, and this is a countywide problem. This is not a St. Petersburg problem. This is not a Clearwater problem. This is not a Tarpon Springs problem. This is a countywide problem. These countywide solutions are what we are doing as a community. And as all the nonprofits and all those that are trying to do something about this, are we actually trying to solve the problem? Or are we just providing services to the homeless? And there's a big difference. There's a big difference. So with that, I'll stop.
Get over here for just a second. It's time for our questions. Think up some good ones. Wait a minute. 45 seconds. No speeches. Please state your name.
Go ahead, Pat.
Sheriff, Pat Wheeler. Sheriff, the deputies on the front lines there, they've got situations where they've got to have to tell between someone who has mental health or someone that's wants to kill them, that sort of thing. How, it's got to be a solution for these deputies. What a job it is to try to make a split-second decision on someone that's really mentally sick versus someone that really got a gun and want to kill them. So can you talk about that just for a moment?
Well, it is, and sometimes it's not a bright line, and that's why they deserve a lot of credit for having to make those split-second decisions. They look at the totality of the circumstances, and sometimes you can't tell immediately. What is absolutely important is that they don't get harmed. The officers, the deputies don't get harmed in the process. But that's why we do the crisis intervention team training, and that's why we do the other things that we do and give them the tools that are necessary so they can identify it and try and resolve it without harm to them or to the other people. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes you don't know until after you've had to take action that what caused it is not anything other than a mental or behavioral health issues, and it's oftentimes not a bright line. So training is vitally important, and we'll continue to expand crisis intervention team training, get more of our deputies. A whole bunch of them right now, because I told you 332 out of the 465 are brand new. So we need to get more people into that, and we're going to try and expand that within the Sheriff's Office. Yeah, Wingate, go ahead.
Thank you, Sheriff Gaultieri. Good report. Thanks for the job you do. I have a question. Last year, City of St. Petersburg had 2,400 juvenile arrests. They took them out to the Pinellas County. I call it jail for children. The reason I call it that is because on state level, they approved $196 million for FY15 for juvenile jail beds. So they call it jail. I'm gonna call it jail. Could you touch basically on the juvenile operation? You didn't say anything about that.
Sure. So I think what you're kind of referring to there is what some people call the civil citation program or the juvenile diversion programs. It costs here in Pinellas County, I told you it costs $123 a day to house somebody in the county jail. The per day cost to house somebody at the Pinellas County Juvenile Detention Center, which isn't run by us, it's run by the State Department of Juvenile Justice, it's about $250 a day. And you're paying for 110 beds, and right now they got about 60 kids in there, but you pay for all 110. And so what we really need to do, and the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office has been a leader in the state on this, is with juvenile diversion programs, and for those kids that are committing minor crimes, is to give them an opportunity not to have that permanent record because of that minor mistake that they made, to divert them. Not that there's not consequences, there has to be consequences for what they've done, but they all don't need to go into the juvenile justice system, they all don't need to be booked into the Pinellas Juvenile Assessment Center, they all don't need to go to a DJJ facility, and that we have run this program for about 15 years very successfully with very low recidivism. And most of these kids, most of them will get on the right track when they successfully complete the diversion program. So I'm a big supporter of them, and we'll continue to do that. I know St. Pete recently this year initiated a program. It's a good program. It's on the right track. It's not as complete a diversion program as what we have, but it's better than what was happening here previously. So I'm a big supporter of it. I give Mayor Kreisman and Chief Holloway a lot of credit for finally getting it going, getting it up and running, because it does work. And these kids don't need that criminal record right off the bat. We even do it for some felonies. Criminal mischief, vandalism. Anything over $1,000 is a felony. Anything under is a misdemeanor. Well, why should a kid get tagged with that felony and not be eligible for diversion because it's $1,005 of damage versus $995? I think we have to apply common sense and good judgment to these things, and we do allow some diversion for some felonies like that. You got to take into account victim restitution and a number of other factors. But I'm big supporter of juvenile diversion, but I'm not, like FAST was trying to do this year and get a bill passed in the legislature that I adamantly opposed, was mandatory every time, only civil citation. The law enforcement officers need discretion and need to be able to use their judgment with it. But I support it. I support it for more than one time. I support it for 2 or 3 times if it's appropriate. Every situation should be evaluated on its merits and with that child and what resources are available to that kid. Yep, go ahead, Kim. Yeah.
Kim Black, thank you for being here and for the work that you do. The data that you stated about gun burglaries and the mental health issues has me concerned when I learned that there was a bill before the legislature that the Florida Sheriff's Association came out in support of the concealed weapon. You don't need a concealed weapon permit to carry for 48 hours during an emergency evacuation. So if you could share the data behind that decision for the Sheriff's Association to come out and strong support of that bill.
Well, we adamantly opposed it last year because it was crazy. And this year is that it was very tempered and it was very narrow. It only allows people to carry a concealed firearm without a permit after the governor declares a state of emergency and at the local level, local officials order a mandatory evacuation. And it is only, not like it was last year, it is only for 48 hours and only while somebody is actively involved in fleeing from that narrow mandatory evacuation area to the point that they get to where they are safe. So it was very narrowly tailored. I think the circumstances are much different than they were last year. And as it goes with that is really the best that it's going to get, and it was very narrow. So we decided to support it because it was much different than what we adamantly opposed last year. But keep in mind, it's a narrow time period, it's from a narrow area, and you have to be actively fleeing. So with that, it didn't give me any concern because we tightened it up so much. Yep.
I am Warren Eisenhower. I have a good friend whose daughter suffered from epileptic seizures. The only thing that they have to control is the medical marijuana. What is your position on medical marijuana and why?
So, two things. One is CDB, Charlotte's Web. that the legislature approved and still has not taken effect. And if you've been following that, I supported it actively and encouraged the legislature to pass that. It's CDB, which is not THC, which is not the stuff that gets people high, and it controls the seizures. I support that, have no issue with it. It's not in smokable form, it's in oil form or other absorption forms, no issue with it. I don't think that you can or should quarrel with the concept or the premise that there is value, medical value, medicinal value to THC. And the reason why I say that is because there is today FDA-approved synthetic forms of THC that you take by pill that a doctor, an MD, a DO will give you a prescription for, and that's Marinol and other substances. So there is medical value to THC. So that people want THC to relieve pain, I don't have an issue with it. What I do have a huge issue with is it in smokable form, because I think when people are advocating for it in smokable form, that's not for medical purposes, it's subterfuge for recreational purposes. And if it can be done in such a way, and I do believe that it has no place in the Florida Constitution, I do believe this is a dialogue and debate that should be had in the Florida legislature, and I think the Florida legislature needs to undertake this issue and take it up and have the dialogue and debate. Wherever it ends up, but they need to undertake it, and I have said that all along and continue to stress that. Now this year, there are a couple of bills filed. Senator Brandis filed one, I believe Representative Stubbe out of Manatee filed one. They didn't even get their first hearing, but I think the legislature needs to engage it, and as long as it's not in smokable form, if it's in oils or vapors or those things that resemble medicine and in a controlled way, I don't have an issue with it. Yeah, go ahead in the back.
And we're following up on the transporting of those weapons. Yes. What about transporting back?
And transporting back, how it works is it reverts to current Florida law. Current Florida law today allows somebody without a permit, anybody without a permit, as long as you're not a convicted felon, etc. But anybody today can carry a concealed weapon in your vehicle as long as it's, quote, securely encased. And all securely encased means that it's in a glove box, it's in a cigar box with a lid on it, it's in a snapped holster, etc. So, and the NRA was good with us, and that's one of the things that changed from last year too, because it was this broad period and it was going and it was coming and it was everything else, is that so today, so if you use that provision of law to, well, you're actively fleeing from the evacuation zone in that narrow period and you go to Alabama, is that you got to get it back within the confines of current law, which means that you can't carry it on your person concealed without a permit. It means you'd have to transport it in a vehicle or in some other lawful means. So the exception that Tim was talking about does not apply to bringing it back. That's why it's very narrow and very tight, but there are current mechanisms in Florida law where you could get it back by putting it in your car and having it securely encased. Let's see, go ahead.
James Adler, Sheriff. Good morning and thank you very much for being here. My question has to do with capital outlay. We've had 20 years of Pinellas, Pinellas. Do you foresee any capital outlay within the next period, which will be the next 10 years, for capital outlay in the Sheriff's Office?
I'd love it. To answer your question, yeah, there is room for it. I think that we do need. We went through a very tough time during the 5 years of the economic downturn. We reduced our general fund budget in the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office during that 5-year period by $108 million. We cut over 600 positions. There were no pay increases, and all spending was frozen. And we're feeling the effects of that today. We have deputies today that are driving cruisers that have 140, 150,000 miles on them. They're 10 years old. They're breaking down, literally. That is certainly, that funding is within the statute, although it's not funded through CIP, through the Capital Improvement Program, through Penny for Pinellas, but the statute does allow for it. And I think that, perhaps in the next penny, and hopefully the voters will approve it, that's something for public safety vehicles is something that might be considered. So I would think that that would be a good use of that money, because as we stand here right now at the end of this year, because we've got to put these vehicles on the street that are reliable so the deputies can respond to calls, because they're breaking down. I hear it on the radio. They're calling for records, literally, is that we'll have this year about $13 million in debt $13 million in debt because we're having to finance these vehicles because the can has been kicked down the road for so long, is that I would like to see us not have that debt and be able to pay for those, and I think the CIP program is a good place to do that. So there are other areas where we do have capital needs. All of the facilities, though, all the bricks and mortar for the Sheriff's Office. Sheriffs in Florida, as you know, are independent constitutional officers, but sheriffs can't own property. All the property that we occupy is owned by the county. So all of the bricks and mortar CIP is handled by the county. It doesn't come through us or come through our budget, but we do have significant needs. The jail is an example of that. So I think there are some very, very valuable needs that could be funded through the CIP program, and I would encourage looking at that. I'd rather us pay cash than finance the vehicles. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Leonard Schmiege. My question is regarding the influence of money in politics. You are ideally suited to answer this question as Florida Sheriff's Association Legislative Chairman. The issue is what I call political threat money. That's when somebody with deep pockets like Sheldon Adelson threatens a candidate with a well-financed opposition if they don't publicly comply with his position. A form of legal political blackmail, if you will. So considering the fact that recently the sheriffs had voted to oppose medical marijuana legislation, do you know if sheriffs that are for medical marijuana but will not say so publicly due to the threat of opposition money? And could you elaborate?
Trying to follow the question, but I think that the sheriffs of Florida are going to make and do make their own decisions independently and then as an association on a variety of issues. I can tell you for me is that the money doesn't matter. It's not making decisions based upon money or who's going to contribute to a campaign or who's not. It's based upon doing what's the right thing to do and weighing it all. But as you make that decision about what the right thing to do is, you also got to weed through the mud and get to the clear issues. So the sheriffs, when we came out in opposition, if you will, to medical marijuana, it wasn't just an opposition to medical marijuana. Again, it gets back to the smokable form, and what we all have to be careful that we do when we make statements or ask questions is that there's not a lot of spin in there. We got to be careful about what we say, how we say it, and it's all accurate. I can tell you that most of the sheriffs that I spoke to and most of the sheriffs that I deal with and know about it through the association, the big issue that we have with medical marijuana is the smokable form that leads to recreational use, which is abuse. And I think that's where we are on it. And I can tell you that Sheldon Adelson doesn't factor in anything I do or say. I can tell you that. Yeah, in the back.
Sheriff, I'm Courtney Leonard. I want to go back to the scary statistics that you cited about the experience of your force. So it's kind of a two-part question. Are your officers leaving because of money? And if so, would you support the legalization of marijuana if you knew that you were going to get more money to pay for more officers?
So they're leaving for a variety of reasons, and one of the reasons that they were leaving and now has stopped, thankfully, is because of money. That was a big factor because we were not competitive. And thanks to the support from the county commission last year, we were able to implement the first part of a 2-year plan to fix our pay issues. As the largest law enforcement agency in this county, one of the largest in the Tampa Bay area, we were seriously underpaid. And we had a pay plan that was a disaster. It was an absolute mess. And when officers from the Bel Air Police Department are starting at more pay than Pinellas County Sheriff's deputies, and you're one of the biggest and you're one of the least paid, there's a problem. So with the help of the county commission and the support of the county commission, because that's the only way I was able to do it, is with their support, we're able to fix that the first half of it last year, and they've approved a plan that will finish fixing that this year and has made a difference. We're not seeing people leave the way they used to. So the attrition has greatly slowed, which is a great thing. The second part of your question is, as far as legalizing marijuana for recreational use, no way. No, and all you got to do is look at what happens out in Colorado with that, and if you get taxes by legalizing, quote, marijuana, is that the underground marijuana market in Colorado is as bad or worse as it was before because people are doing it underground so they don't have to pay the taxes on it. And I have a huge problem with recreational use of marijuana, and you can have the debate all day long about whether marijuana is different than alcohol or not, or whether it's different than Jack Daniels and all that kind of stuff. But, my concern is about the kids. Is that how do we sit there and tell kids is that we have an addiction problem in this country. That's the problem. It's an addiction problem. So and we don't manage alcohol well. We don't manage a lot of things. Look at what we just went through with the prescription drug abuse problem. It's an addiction problem. We can't solve this drug problem. Law enforcement cannot solve this drug problem. We deal with the effects of it, but because it's an addiction problem, the only way you're going to get to the core of it is with prevention, education, and treatment. And so why would we now legalize something else that can be abused when the stuff that is legal is highly abused in and of itself? So I don't support it for that reason. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Got to get Terry. Got to get Terry.
Thank you so much for the leadership that you've shown. My question is, my name, I forget, I've been so long, Terry Bryant. My concern is the excessive force being used around the country by law enforcement officers. And I'm questioning, even though a person been there for 25 years or 2 years, the psychological training being done for these officers, as well as retraining how to disarm and disable a person without the excess force.
Well, I think that you got 18,000 police departments, 3,100 sheriff's offices, right, and you got a lot of people who are doing, and Terry, you know as well as I do, is that every one of them is not perfect, okay? Is that we as a profession have room to do it better. And what you're seeing and what you're hearing about are, in a very publicized way, are those few and far between that are doing it improperly. Unfortunately, I'll suggest to you that this is no different in many respects than what's been going on for a long time. It's getting more attention now, and those people need to be dealt with effectively, swiftly, and fired or prosecuted or whatever is appropriate, because we need to hold them accountable, and we need to hold our own accountable. And so is it room for discussion about better de-escalation techniques, about better communication skills, about better ways to do it? Absolutely. And I think we're doing that. And I think we do it very well overall here in Pinellas County. We don't have the allegations that they're having in other places. Could it happen tomorrow? Yeah, it could, but I think as long as you got the leadership in place, and the message that we send, and I send every single day to our people, is we're going to treat you fairly. We're going to treat you as well as we can, but there's going to be a high degree of accountability. And I tell them that all the time. And as long as they understand that, and they understand there is accountability for their actions, and that they need to do the right thing, then hopefully we keep them on the right course. But there is room, and there's a lot of discussion on a national basis that I partake in about different forms of training, different ways, especially communication skills. And it's better for the community to understand what we do, how we do it, why we do it. And that's why transparency is vitally important. I'm a big believer in transparency, and the media has a role. The media has a role. I don't always like it, but they have a role. And but I respect their role in getting that information out. And the more that you all see what we do, how we do it in a transparent way, I think we all win from that. In the back. Yeah, Gary, go ahead.
My name is Gary Skrupinski. Sheriff, I want to thank you for your service. I think it's an outstanding job. And I think if we had the election tomorrow, you would easily be re-elected hands down. My question to you is your political ambitions. In the past, it was rumored that you were going to run for Congress. Then it was rumored that you were going to run for the Attorney General. And then the latest rumor is that you want to run in the case for the state attorney. So could you please comment on your political ambitions on the road?
I guess I should have shared that with Bernie before we came here. That's funny because, that's been going around for probably, I don't know, a year and a half, that rumor. couple years has been going around, and it's not true. Bernie does a great job, and his office is very well run, and I have no desire or intention. I'm sure Bernie will run again, and he deserves it because he does a great job. The answer to your question is that I'll run again in 2016. I have no desire to do anything other than be the Pinellas County Sheriff. But I learned a long time ago in life, you never say never. You never know what the future brings. But I will probably announce sometime this fall, and you'll see me on the ballot for Pinellas County Sheriff in 2016. And I have nothing but an intention to fulfill that term. And beyond that, we'll see.
All right, Jim.
Yeah.
We all heard that. Let's give a round of applause to our sheriff. And I want to present you with our coveted Carve Up a Politician for lunch for your collection. You probably have a shelf full of them already. I want to remind you that on June 25th, we have Jack Levine here with Florida's 4 Generations. Yeah, cool. Challenges for families and opportunities for communities. And our winner of the Fang and Claw question today is Gary Stempinski. Well, hopefully you remember what the question was. It's only been 30 seconds, folks. What are the sheriff's political ambitions? This way in front of the Tigers.
Towards the back.
You've been listening to the luncheon from the Suncoast Tiger Bay Club meeting today at the St. Pete Yacht Club.
All right, we are adjourned.
In downtown St. Petersburg, part of our continuing series of live event broadcasts here on RadioSt.Pete.com. You heard the president of the club talk about the next event on the 25th of June. They'll be taking a look at 4 generations and public policy in that program. Later on this summer, the president of the Tampa Bay Rays, Brian Auld, will be here at the Tiger Bay Club.